Welcome to PhalanxCast. My name is Gabor Berkics. I am working for Phalanx Software, a business software company based in Malta. And this is the first episode of our new podcast series. My first guest is Kyle Pullicino, who is the CEO and founder of Phalanx Software. Welcome, Kyle. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you, Gabor. And it's nice to be on the first podcast that we're organizing. Since we've been working from home now for the past year and a half. It's a nice way of discussing some issues. Previously, we would have done this in the office, but now we had to. The entire world had to find different ways to connect, and I think having a podcast like this is such a good way of even delving into some issues that are happening around the world, have these discussions, and hopefully, who knows, maybe the people listening on the podcast can join in the discussion as well.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. The pandemic is challenging in many ways. One of them is that people are isolated, separated from each other. So modern technology can offer many ways, including this, to record a podcast, to
Mhm.
create connections between people. Our first, the topic of our first episode is connected to the pandemic. We were looking at the COVID tracing applications which were developed here in Malta and throughout Europe, and also in general the importance of tracing infected, possibly infected people
Mhm.
within the community. And also, we would like to speak about business automation in general, which is connected to the pandemic and also of our core activity. This is what Phalanx Software is doing. So, Kyle, what do you think about COVID tracing in general? Do you think it's something useful? Do you think it should be emphasized by the governments in order to tackle the pandemic better?
Mhm. So um, I think in general tracing is useful. It seems to have, or at least from my opinion, is that it seems to have an effect on the infection rates and transmission numbers because um, it at least informs people who might have been in contact with an infected person to get checked, to get tested. Um, in the pandemic, the whole tracing process came to the forefront because it's such a big deal that when the pandemic came to be, it's almost like the governments really jumped leapt to COVID tracing, started the process, made sure everyone was calling. But in reality, the whole process of uh, contact tracing happens even in cases of uh, different viral infections. There's other diseases where the system is used and is just the pandemic has brought it to the forefront. It's much more widespread now. And at the beginning of the pandemic in Malta, I think they were doing quite well as well, in my opinion, when things were starting about a year ago, when people were getting informed that they came into contact with an infected person. But then, when the cases started spiraling out of control, it's very clear that the process of contact tracing was too much to handle because people were getting into contact with possibly an exponentially number of other people, and there's a limit to how many people you can have contact doing this contact tracing. So um, it's a good idea for sure. At the start, there was a handle on it, but now as cases started growing, it seems we lost a bit um, control over the tracing process and getting in touch with possibly infected people.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
So I think that two kinds of contact tracing could be used by any government. One of them is something we can call manual contact tracing, which means that if somebody tested positive, they are asked to reveal with which people did they meet, and then someone starts to call those people, ask them if they have symptoms, and offers them to be tested.
Mhm.
Obviously, this is a less efficient way,
Mhm.
because human it's consuming a lot of human workforce, which means that a lot of operators are necessary. And if the cases are in the range of hundreds, thousands, or even if or in a bigger country, tens of thousands,
Mhm.
it's getting more and more overwhelming for the operators to or for the whole system to keep track of it.
Mhm.
We are here in Malta. It's such a small country. It's the population is something like 500,000, but when the cases were in the range of 300, 400 in early March, the news were about the overwhelmed contact tracing team, which meant that it took days or even a week for someone who was potentially contagious
Mhm.
to be called by a helpline operator to get tested. And just imagine that uh, you're you're asymptomatic, you just met someone who tested positive, maybe the virus is in you, and you can walk freely for a week, going to work, going to do run your errands, meeting dozens of hundreds of people, which means that you can possibly infect a lot of people.
Exactly, and it makes things even worse then because, as I said, it keeps growing exponentially. It keeps spreading so much that it keeps there's this loop, this feedback loop of uh, you're overwhelmed, so you lose control, so more people get infected, and it becomes difficult. I think the problem is the nature of the virus as well,
Hmm.
right?
What do you mean?
The virus is unlike other viruses that, for example, I'm not an expert in virology, but a virus like HIV is much easier to contact trace,
Yes, of
right?
course, of course.
But in our case, since the COVID pandemic, you might not even know, since it's transmitted through air droplets, you could infect multiple people just by your mere presence. And it starts. Sometimes you wouldn't even know who they are if you went to a restaurant. Um, you obviously don't take a note of the people you've been there. You don't take a note of the waiter you've spoken to, but even though they could be infected as well in this case.
Yes, exactly, and the number of examples from everyday life is basically countless. Where you could get in contact with anyone, and also it makes it much harder for the authorities to actually put people in a mandatory quarantine, to
Mm.
enforce it as well, and just basically to keep track of the whole disease. And last year, before we had the vaccines ready, the only tools in the hand of the governments were testing and tracing, basically, to isolate the people who are infected, and also to do as much tests as possible to see who are the infected ones, actually. To solve this issue, the governments all around the world, particularly in more developed, richer countries, most of them started to develop various applications which could be installed on smartphones. Malta was one of them. We have the app up and running. It could be downloaded to Android, to Apple devices as well. What do you think about these applications, and do you think they are useful or not?
I mean, I think technology wise, it's impressive because this is a luxury that people in past pandemics did not have. For sure, people in past pandemics did not even have the knowledge about how something like this occurs. But now we even have the technology to maybe um, control the pandemic. Unfortunately, though, um, my impression is that they weren't really taken up. The apps, for example, the app we had in Malta, only a few percentage of the population got the app installed. Now I have it. I have it running, in fact, and I believe my family also has it running. Uh, but my impression is that it was not really taken up, and I think the reason is a mixture of people being worried about what the app is doing, and also because people might not be too they might not care really to install an app like this. Unfortunately, it would have been, imagine if you imagine that everyone, the entire population had to install this app, uh, it would be like a dream come true because now there's no manual contact tracing that you have to do. The computer would do it automatically. It would just tracking who's getting in contact with who and just sends out the notification. Unfortunately, we ended up in the other situation where barely anyone um, installed it. So I don't know how effective it has been in aiding contact tracing. And I mean, the idea is very good, but maybe the execution could have been a bit better. Um, Although I'll be honest with you, I don't know what can be done to increase its adoption. Maybe because it has been marketed quite extensively as well. A lot of people know about it, but maybe not enough people appreciate the advantages that uh, such a tool could have on the outcome of the pandemic.
Yes, you are right. Preparing to this podcast, we spoke about this internally, asking other team members. Also, I managed to speak with some of my friends if they are using or not, to have some feedback from people. And it was very interesting because I also have the app from day one. So what we wanted to hear about people who are against it, and the main concern, the repetitive concern, what we've heard was, first of all, data protection. So they were not they were not convinced that the data which is collected by the government are only used for this purpose, to filter out the infected persons from the community. So they were suspecting possible data leaks, which could happen. And also the other thing is that they just generally didn't know, didn't believe that it could be of any use in tackling the pandemic. So I think I think the communication could have been better and more simple on top of that. But regarding the technical execution, do you think is there any space to improve it? Is there a lesson to learn about this in, for example, a next pandemic or the next wave of COVID-19?
With regards to technical execution, I think something that I appreciated a lot was the fact that the code has been made open source. So, open source for people listening in means that anyone in the world can go in and check what code the application is running on your phone. I did this. I actually went to they uploaded the code on GitHub, which is popular open source web application where everyone may publish their code. And I did go through the code. Now, admittedly, I did not go into detail to verify what's happening, but other people could do this, and you could get the code audited as well. Um, so even the fact that it was made open source, it's already a admission of transparency. At least whoever is behind this is at least trying to be transparent about what's happening. So that's very good. In fact, I would say that the lesson there is more general than the pandemic. Actually, I hope the government takes that lesson and applies it to other processes that have nothing to do with the pandemic. I hope when they do other kinds of data collection, which have nothing to do with the pandemic, maybe in healthcare. Okay, we've done it in the pandemic. Maybe let's something that's closely related would be healthcare. Is the use of open source code so that the people involved are comfortable in the knowledge that their data, which is being collected, is not used maliciously. And that was a good way of being transparent. Now, something else that might have been made people uncomfortable is the fact that the phone, when you install the app, starts asking for a lot of permissions. Particularly, for example, it wants to know your location. Now, maybe that could be improved for sure, rather than asking for a generic permission. You know, where it says the phone wants to track where you're at. A more detailed description of what's happening might have helped. So I'll be honest with you. I don't agree, for example, with the argument that the contact tracing wouldn't have helped. Because as I said, if everyone installs this app 100%, you don't need a single human being doing the contact tracing. Everyone just gets a notification instantly, automatically, and you go and get checked. There you go. So that might have maybe a better understanding. And in the future, I think this will get better. Not, unfortunately, not with regards to this pandemic, but in the future, people will start appreciating open source more. Um, Europe has always been very privacy conscious.
Civil liberties as well.
Yes, exactly, exactly. We've always been, compared to other places in the world, I think the European Union has always taken data privacy very seriously, with the introduction of GDPR recently as well, um, which is unlike anything else that there is in the world. So, uh, and slowly but surely, I think people will start realizing that this is the way to tackle data privacy. Um, Something that is a bit, that makes me a bit uncomfortable, is the fact that there were a lot of concerns about data privacy with respect to this contact tracing app, even though it was open source. But then when it comes to other types of applications, such as social media apps, and I mean, we can mention Facebook is a big contributor to this. Uh, there's very little concern about what Facebook are doing, even though it asks for more permissions. It asks to listen to your microphone. It asks to listen to your location. But those aren't really concerning, even though they're collecting much, much, much more data, even just by being installed on your phone.
I agree with you, and we as part of the people who are more involved in technology in our daily life can clearly see that. But do you think that the recent data leaks, breaches by tech giants such as Facebook contributed to the people being reluctant to use this application?
Um, uh, yes, it could be. It could be. I mean, I understand. It's good that people are concerned about their privacy. Don't get me wrong. People should be questioning. You shouldn't just install any app on your phone, especially if it says that it's tracking your location. Um, but uh, even the fact, unfortunately, knowledge about data privacy is still quite low, to tell you the truth. Even though people are concerned, the knowledge about what an application can do is still quite low, because uh, if you truly look into it, for example, if people really knew what type of data Facebook is collecting, they would be much more concerned about it. Whereas that's why I think in the future something like this would work better, because people are slowly but surely understanding uh, as time goes by. I feel like it's getting much easier to explain issues of data privacy, and how important it is um, to protect your data. In fact, a big argument that's brought up a lot is, why should I be concerned about my data privacy if I have nothing to hide?
Hmm.
That's a very big argument that you hear all the time. But people do not realize how much uh, how much information I can extract from just the fact that you use, for example, let's say you make a search on uh, any popular search engine, Google. Okay, Google is tracking your searches. So if I look up a particular type of medicine brand, Google now knows um, what illness you're going through, and it's going to, and there you go, it has medical data about you. Which is exactly the same as the contact tracing app, but no one complains there. So it's, over time, I think people will get more comfortable with sorry, let me rephrase that. People will get more inquisitive. They will ask more questions about the data being collected and will check more in depth about which software to trust. And my rule of thumb is that if something is open source, usually it's more trustworthy. Not necessarily, okay, you still have to ask the questions, you still have to go through the code, but it's a good rule of thumb to begin with. If it's open source, probably um, it's safer to use.
Yes, but first of all, I think the most important and the first step would be to raise awareness of even
Mhm.
the term open source,
Yes,
because
exactly.
if I just think about it, maybe our age group, not bad, the awareness of it, but older people, older generations, for example, if I would ask my parents what is open source, they wouldn't know. And also, I think that another issue in this is that people are willing happily to give much more of their sensitive data to social media because they feel that they get something in return. So they can have fun there, they can
Mhm.
see their friends' pictures, they can play games, they can spend time there.
Mhm.
But using a COVID tracing app, what would one think? That the only thing in return is that I can get 2 weeks mandatory quarantine.
Yes, yes, very good point actually. Yes, I agree for sure.
And
And
first, for a first look, I don't even know what could be offered for them to use this, but the government has a lot of tools in its hands to make it more. Um
mhm.
to raise awareness of the whole thing and
Mhm.
to get more users
Mhm.
for such apps.
Exactly.
Regarding to the second topic, what we wanted to talk about in Malta, the vaccine rollout has been changed recently because when it started in early this year, there wasn't any registration system, registration tool. Everybody received an invitation automatically who was in the actual age group or who was an essential worker, for example, so workers, policemen, members of the army, and it worked out pretty good actually because as far as I know, here in Malta, there are no anti-vaxxers basically. So the overwhelming majority who had an invitation took their appointment and showed up and got vaccinated. But in my home country, I'm from Hungary, the situation is completely different because there are it's a very controversial topic in the
Mhm.
society to get vaccinated or not. And even among the older generations, there are many people who are against it, even those ones who are the most vulnerable to the consequences of being infected. So from day one, there was a registration site made by the government to allow people to subscribe and be included in the list who are waiting for a vaccine. But also, uh, it raised concerns because the handling of the data, processing of the data was very unclear by the government. So there were strong voices which said that the government is building up a database for itself for the upcoming general election next year
Mhm.
to reach out to people who can be potential voters, and it was managed in a very amateur way at the beginning because there was no confirmation email. One could so one phone number could be used by several people. So when a text message came that you, now you are here is your appointment, for example, a family which has only one phone, they didn't know who to send to the vaccination point. So my question is that do you think that in Malta it's a good step forward to change to this registration model, or to introduce this tool or not? What are
Mm.
the pros and the cons of it?
Uh, Thinking about it, to its credit, the government, I think, mm, took the um, at least one of the best paths that it could take. That is to start with the vulnerable people, and they get an automatic appointment. And then once that is done, they switch to a registration-based system. I think it's fine, and I'll tell you why. Because it's um, vulnerable people in our case tended to be people who are older, who might be less familiar with technology. So asking someone who is older uh, to uh, go in and register using your ID card and so on might have been a headache in its own. So the way they did it was, I think it was fine. Okay. Now, something that uncovered is that the government data about its own citizens seems to be lacking in some areas, because um, there were some
Outdated,
people.
you mean?
Sorry.
Outdated or insufficient, you
Yes,
mean?
exactly.
Mhm.
Or outdated, wrong addresses happened a lot. Um, and so, since that data seems to have been missing, that's why when it came to going for the rest of the population, I think switching to a registration based system is fine, so that you don't rely on your so that the government doesn't rely on its incorrect data. Um, yes, having this that's one of the big pros of the whole registration system, that now you announce as best as you can that the vaccine will be given to anyone requesting it. And here's the website. They also added an option to register by SMS and by email, I believe. I'm not sure, but
You
so
can call the helpline as well,
all right, you can call the
which
helpline,
was
exactly.
established by the government for people who are not very familiar with internet or using a computer.
Exactly. That's great, because there are still people who are uh, not as old, but they would still be unfamiliar with um, using technology as us. So I think that's great. Um, I'm not sure, for example, if it lets you uh, select your preferred times or your preferred location. I don't know if it does that. Maybe they don't want to do that so that they can spread people around. But um, I think the effort in that application was very good. And to tell you the truth, um, I'm also it shows how much potential there is in using these kind of systems. Okay, um, the, these information systems where we already in Malta, every citizen has an ID card number. The fact that, now I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but the fact that automatically it's collecting your ID card number, and once you go there, all you have to do is they can verify that you took your vaccine, that you don't take your vaccine twice. Um, making sure it really is you that applied is it's very very good. So I hope these kind of information systems are used much more extensively in the future, not just uh, for this one case that happened in the pandemic. I hope the pandemic has shown us how much potential there is when it comes to applying tech to our real lives, and not just for the pandemic. For example, I'm going to give you an example. Um, and this is related to healthcare as well, so it's not just completely irrelevant. The uh, so if you have an appointment in hospital, every single time you go to hospital, they ask for your details, and you have to give them your details, and that is what all this data redundancy, every time having to give your details and make sure it's up to date, is what leads to data becoming out of date. So why is that data not associated with your ID card number? So that, let's say I have an appointment in hospital. I go to the hospital, I go into the doctor's office. There's a I don't know how many people know this, but there's a chip on the ID card itself. There's a sort of a smart card on the. No one ever uses that, but all you have to do is just punch it in onto the doctor's desk, and immediately the doctor gets all your details, all your data, all your records. There's no room for error, and they make sure that's your appointment. There's no wrong addresses because you didn't get your appointment in time. We know who your next of kin are, any allergies you have, because there was no manual data input. So why isn't that used more? Just like we've used it for the vaccine now. So clearly it is possible to do this. So I encourage societies around the world to start doing this much, much more.
Exactly, and then if something good could come out of this pandemic, among the countless bad effects on society and in general the human race, it, it could be this actually. But the two key elements for this is first of all the trust that people needs to trust
Mhm.
the governments, those ones who are processing this data actually,
Yes,
that
yes, yes.
they will in fact use it for the purpose that they asked it for.
Mhm.
This is essential.
Which is why, because you mentioned, for example, in Hungary, they might not trust the government so much.
Yes.
Which is why, that is why you have to, um, things like open source exist, and you have to take responsibility of your own data. You have to be responsible. If someone asks for your data, check, verify that um, what they're doing is correct. And you said they not so trust in Hungary, society doesn't trust the government. That's not bad in itself. Being There's no reason to trust the government will do things right. In fact, unfortunately, sometimes
Do you think
uh,
it's not reasonable to assume that the government will save the health of the society?
it's no, I don't think no. Governments want their people to be healthy, but unfortunately, there are so many people involved in government. It's not just one person. That it's very easy to make a mistake. So easy to make a mistake. There are so many people involved. Um, I hate to use the word incompetence, but with so many people involved, even, and there is no malicious intent. Okay, there's no malicious intent in this. It's just so easy to make a mistake. Humans make a mistake very easily. I mean, imagine you're typing someone's ID card number and you just hit the wrong number. That's it. There was no malicious intent, but now you've made the error large, because now we're seeing the wrong address. We've sent the wrong letter to the wrong person. and you've just now, imagine you type someone's address wrong. You've just now revealed someone else's health conditions
Yes, yes, yes,
to
yes, yes.
someone else. There you go. That's a data leak. And that's why I think when we say we're not trusting our government, it's not because our government is trying to be malicious, but because our government is made up of human people. So, and human people make mistakes. That's why you should be responsible for your data, because humans make mistakes, your data will get leaked. So verify that what's happening to your data, and that's the reason.
Exactly. Um, let me see. So, speaking about this, as we spoke about it between us, not just in, but not in the podcast, you told me that the very idea to found Phalanx Software came out of this
Mhm.
to get things more efficient, more automated. Could you speak about this? The path that led you here.
So I'm a computer scientist at heart. So I've my master's degree was in computer science, and you do a lot of things in university which are ideal. You know, everyone starts. You start going to these different lectures where everyone's dreaming big, and everything is automated. Where you start hearing of stories where people are just sitting at home and they have nothing to do because computers are taking care of everything. And then you hit the real world, you start working in the real world, and you realize we are so far from this ideal. A lot of people who are not into technology see, for example, recently I was reading about um, and it's not related to vexing through, but I was reading about self-driving cars, automated, and to a lot of people that's like, that's mind-blowing. Wow, we're living in the future. But then when you start working in the industry and you um, working for I used to work for an iGaming company, I used to work for a financial services, financial technology company. You start working in the company and you realize how far behind we are when it comes to automation, where everything is getting done manually. And every single time you do something manually, there's room for error. In the case of healthcare, okay, like what we've just been talking about, every error could cost someone's life as well.
Yes, the stakes are high.
The stakes are higher. So when I left my job, I left because I thought that I could do better. I could at least help society uh, with automation. We call it business automation, but it's not necessarily a commercial project. It could be any kind of project where automation, anything you apply automation to, will help um, with this um, with achieving better results, better quality, removing room for error. And I think society has started realizing that this is the way. It's not going as fast as I hope it would, as I hoped it would. Um, People, there are a number of issues that we need to deal with. For example, data privacy. We mentioned it already. If you want to automate, you need more data. So we need to deal with that. Issues of artificial intelligence. How far do we take it? and automation means that people will lose their jobs. We need to deal with that moral issue. It's a very moral, philosophical issue, but it needs to be dealt with. Um, and also other issues such as skills. There are actually very few people who are. There's a big demand for software developers and engineers and so on that are specialized in this kind of thing. So there's that skill gap that we need to tackle as well. And when I founded the company, that was the aim, to try and plug uh, this big mentality shift that is needed towards automation. Unfortunately, again, I don't want to generalize, but I think multi society as a whole is still a bit behind when it comes mentality wise. Um, how we can use automation. The will is there, but we're still a bit. Uh, we still haven't taken that leap to say, all right, our business will be successful only if we can automate. That mentality isn't there yet. There are a lot of um, people that says the biggest argument I hear against automation is that if something has worked for us for the past 20 years, why should I change now? That mentality is very pervasive in multi society. So I'm trying in our companies in our own little way is trying to change that mentality. That the pandemic has helped a lot with that because now everyone's like, clearly we need to automate. For example, big uh, the big spare in the food delivery services that we had in Malta. A year and a half ago, no one used any delivery. You'd have restaurants not using a delivery service because it costs money. We make enough money already. We don't need. Now, if you're not on a delivery service, you have no chance of making it through the pandemic. So that is one nice thing that this pandemic has spread, this mentality towards automation and
That's right.
better use of
And
time.
of course, if we still want to eat food which are not cooked by ourselves, basically this is the only way now. So people are one way or another forced to use this app if they want to keep as much of their previous lives as possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this was the first episode of the Phalanx Cast. We thank you so much for listening. I think it was useful to speak about these topics. Thank you for your contribution, Kyle.
Thank you very much yourself. I think it was a very fruitful discussion, in fact.
Exactly, the topics are couldn't be more actual and timely than the ones that we were
Mhm.
speaking about. Please, if you like this podcast, subscribe to our channels. We would also be happy to hear your comments about it, your thoughts about it, also suggestions for further topics for the upcoming episodes would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.